My name is Sophie Burke, and I'm a 29-year-old corporal in the United States Marine Corps. 3 months ago, I was shot out of a helicopter in Kandahar. Today, I came home to Beverly Hills with a piece of shrapnel still lodged in my shoulder and a Purple Heart on my chest. But at the polished mahogany dinner table, my mother glanced at the medal and said, her voice a soft whisper, "It looks like a cheap piece of costume jewelry, darling." My brother, Trevor, chuckled into his expensive wine. But it was my father, Dr. Edward Burke, who delivered the kill shot. He set down his silver fork, looked me dead in the eye, and declared in front of everyone, his voice as cold as ice, "You are not just a disappointment, Sophie. You are this family's greatest disappointment." They didn't know that 6 months later, they would be standing in a room in the White House, trembling as the President of the United States told a story they never wanted to hear. If you have ever given your all only to be met with contempt from the very people you love most, let me know where you're from. Hit that subscribe button because this is the story of how a disappointment became a nation's pride. The air in my family's Beverly Hills dining room was heavier than the humid night air in Kandahar. It was thick with the scent of my mother's Chanel No. 5 and the savory aroma of the chef's filet mignon, cooked to a perfect medium rare. The clinking of heavy silverware against bone china was the room's only consistent soundtrack. I sat stiffly in my Marine Corps dress blues, the fabric coarse against my skin, feeling like a crow that had mistakenly landed in a flock of peacocks. I was a ghost at my own welcome home dinner. The conversation flowed around me, an impenetrable current of names and events I didn't recognize. My mother, Eleanor, recounted every detail of the upcoming charity gala at Elisimi, her voice a carefully orchestrated symphony of feigned humility and social triumph. My brother, Trevor, the golden child, was holding court, describing his tech startup's latest Series B funding round. He spoke of algorithms and user acquisition with the same passion some men speak of love. He was a Silicon Valley star, and his light was blinding. "We're just so incredibly proud," my mother said, placing a delicate hand on Trevor's arm. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, flickered toward me for a fraction of a second, and in that glance, I saw nothing. No pride, not even curiosity. Just a polite, vacant dismissal. I tried to join in to build a bridge across the chasm that had formed over the years. We did some humanitarian work near the base. I started, my voice sounding rough and unused. Helping to build a small school for... "That's nice, dear," my mother interrupted, her smile never faltering as she turned back to Trevor. "Now, Trevor, tell your father about the offer from the venture capital firm in Palo Alto." My words died in my throat. It was then that my father, Dr. Edward Burke, a man who measured the world in IQ points and university rankings, finally addressed me directly. He set his wineglass down, a heavy Cabernet from a Napa vineyard I knew cost more than my monthly paycheck. His eyes, cold and analytical behind his designer glasses, scanned my uniform. "Sophie," he said, his tone clinical, "did you learn any of the languages while you were over there? Pashto, Dari? Or was it all just shooting?" The question wasn't born of interest. It was a test, another academic benchmark I was destined to fail. He wasn't asking about my experience. He was measuring its intellectual worth and finding it lacking. My life over the past 4 years, the grit, the fear, the bonds forged in dust and fire, was reduced to a pass-fail quiz. A knot of frustration and old familiar hurt tightened in my chest. I decided, in a moment of foolish courage, that I would make them see. Not just hear, but see. My hand trembled slightly as I reached into the small pocket of my jacket. I pulled out the Purple Heart. It felt heavy, substantial in my palm. The deep purple ribbon and the profile of George Washington seemed to absorb the dim, elegant light of the chandelier. I placed it gently on the white linen tablecloth next to my half-eaten steak. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. "This is a Purple Heart," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "They give it to soldiers who are wounded or killed in combat." I offered the explanation like a peace treaty, a piece of my world for them to understand. My mother was the first to react. She leaned forward, peering at the medal as if it were an exotic insect. Oh, darling, she cooed, that sugary sweet voice barely concealing the venom. It looks like a cheap piece of costume jewelry. She then waved a dismissive hand. Honestly, your uniform is already so severe. That little trinket will absolutely ruin the family photos at the gala. Trevor let out a short, sharp laugh. He swirled the wine in his glass, the picture of smug superiority. A medal for getting hurt? Hell, I should get one for surviving last quarter's board meeting. That was a bloodbath. His joke landed in the silent room with a thud. To them, the symbol of my blood, spilled on foreign soil, was no different from a Boy Scout badge or a corporate war story. It was just an object, and a tacky one at that. Please, put it away, Sophie, my mother said, her voice losing its sweetness and taking on an edge of irritation. It brings up such unpleasantness. No one wants to think about that sort of thing at the dinner table. That was it. My sacrifice wasn't a source of pride, it was an inconvenience, a conversation killer, a stain on their pristine, carefully curated reality. But the final blow was yet to come. My father, who had been watching the entire exchange with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a failed experiment, placed his fork and knife together on his plate, perfectly parallel. The small sound echoed in the stillness. He dabbed his lips with his napkin, folded it precisely, and placed it on the table. Then, he looked at me. His face was a mask of calm academic disappointment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were scalpels. Your enlistment was not an act of patriotism, Sophie, he began, his voice devoid of all emotion, the voice of a lecturer delivering an undeniable theorem. It was a statistical inevitability, a direct result of academic failure and a subsequent lack of viable, respectable options. It was a chain of poor choices. He paused, letting the weight of his analysis settle over me. Therefore, he concluded, his gaze unwavering, you are not just a disappointment, Sophie. You are this family's greatest disappointment. He said it like he was stating a fact from a textbook. The sky is blue, water is wet. Sophie Burke is a failure. There was no room for argument. A strange, cold calm washed over me. The pain was so immense it had become a void, a numbness that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, my posture perfect, my hands resting in my lap as I had been taught as a child. The spell was broken. My mother picked up her fork. Trevor took another sip of wine. The dinner continued as if nothing had happened. But for me, the world had gone silent. The scrape of my mother's fork against her porcelain plate sounded louder than any gunshot I'd ever heard. In that moment, I realized the terrible truth. I wasn't just unwelcome. I wasn't just misunderstood. To them, my existence, my service, my sacrifice, it was all a source of profound shame. I excused myself from the table, my voice a flat monotone. No one tried to stop me. I walked up the grand staircase to my childhood bedroom, a room that felt more like a museum of a girl I used to be. I closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch sealing me in the dark. I stood there for a long time, the purple heart still clutched in my hand, the sharp edges digging into my palm. It was the only thing in the room that felt real. It was proof that I had lived, that I had fought, that I had bled. It was a testament to a life lived far from this cold, polished house. And as I stared into the darkness, a single, agonizing question burned through the numbness. Why was my life, and the near loss of it, so worthless in their eyes? The question from the night before still hung in the air of my childhood bedroom. Why? Why was my life, my sacrifice, so worthless to them? The answer wasn't in that room. It was buried 9 years in the past, in a cramped dorm room at a Cal State University that my parents always referred to as my little state school. I was 20 years old, drowning in the unforgiving world of pre-med requirements. I remember the exact moment my future shattered. It was 2 a.m., the room smelled of stale coffee and desperation, and the only light came from my laptop screen. The final grades for organic chemistry had just been posted. My eyes scanned the list of student ID numbers until I found mine. And there it was, next to my number. A single, brutal, capital letter. F. It stared back at me, a scarlet letter marking me as a failure. It wasn't just a grade, it was a verdict. The end of the medical school path my parents had meticulously paved for me since I was in kindergarten. The end of their dream. My phone rang almost immediately, as if my mother had a sixth sense for my failures. I answered, my throat tight. There was no, hello darling, no, how are you? Just the cold, crisp tone of a CEO reviewing a bad quarterly report. I've just seen your grades, Sophie, Eleanor said. Her voice was perfectly level, which was always more terrifying than when she yelled. Let's do a little accounting, shall we? The science camp at Johns Hopkins was $15,000. The private chemistry tutor was $200 an hour, twice a week, for an entire year. That's over $20,000 in tutoring alone. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to my life being itemized like a list of sunken costs. We invested in you, Sophie, she continued, her voice dripping with disappointment. We gave you every possible advantage. Do you have any idea that your brother had his first scientific paper published by the time he was 19? 19. I wasn't her daughter in that moment. I was a stock that had plummeted, a bad investment on a balance sheet stained deep in the red. She ended the call with a sigh that cut me deeper than any insult could. You've just thrown our money out the window, Sophie. That's what it always came down to, the return on their investment. And their investments were displayed for all to see, right in the heart of our Beverly Hills home. Above the grand marble fireplace in the living room was what I privately called the Wall of Legacy. It was a shrine to the Burke definition of success. On the left, my father's PhD from Stanford, framed in dark, imposing wood. On the right, my mother's law degree from Yale, equally magnificent. And in the center, occupying the most prominent spot, was the framed cover of Forbes magazine featuring Trevor, grinning under the headline, The 30 Under 30 CEO Taking Silicon Valley by Storm. My own contributions were less celebrated. I remember when I was 14, I'd spent months training before dawn, running until my lungs burned, pushing through the pain. And I won. I won the state cross-country championship. I came home beaming, clutching a tall golden trophy, the heaviest and most beautiful thing I'd ever held. I presented it to my father, my heart pounding with pride. He took it from me, weighed it in his hand, and gave me a thin, academic smile. This is fine, Sophie, he said, his eyes already looking past it. But it won't get you into Harvard. The trophy was never displayed. For a few years, it gathered dust in a corner of the library. The last time I saw it, the cleaning lady was using it as a doorstop. The coldness of that house was a stark contrast to the only place I ever truly felt seen. My grandfather's garage. He was my mother's father, a carpenter and a Marine Corps veteran who smelled of sawdust and old coffee. He never once asked about my grades or my SAT scores. His garage was a sanctuary of tangible things, of work done with your hands. One afternoon, when I was 16 and miserable after a particularly brutal parent-teacher conference, he saw the look on my face. He didn't say anything. He just wiped his hands on a rag and pulled an old, olive-drab canvas bag from a hook on the wall. It was his old corpsman's medical kit from Vietnam. He pointed to a jagged, faded tear near the top. "See this?" he said, his voice raspy. "Got this pulling a Sergeant Miller out of a burning Huey in Khe Sanh. The chopper was going to blow any second." He looked away from the bag and straight into my eyes, his gaze steady and clear. "Saving a life, Sophie," he said softly. "Now that's a legacy no wall is big enough to hang." He handed me the bag. It felt more real, more important than any framed degree on my family's wall. It was a legacy of action, of sacrifice, of compassion. It was everything my family wasn't. 9 years ago, adrift in the sea of my failure, those memories felt like a distant shore. After my mother's phone call, I couldn't stay in my dorm room. I walked aimlessly across the sprawling Cal State campus, feeling invisible. That's when I saw it. A simple folding table set up near the student union. Behind it were 2 Marines in crisp uniforms and a large poster. I was drawn to it, not by the images of helicopters or tough-looking soldiers, but by the words printed in bold, white letters. The few, the proud. A gunnery sergeant, a Latina woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a name tag that read, Rivera, was talking to a couple of students. I stood off to the side, listening. She wasn't selling them a dream of glory. She wasn't promising an easy life. "We're not looking for people who've never failed," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the campus noise. "We're looking for the ones who know how to get back up after they've been knocked flat on their ass." Her eyes met mine for a second, and in that brief moment, for the first time in my entire life, I felt like someone saw my failure not as a flaw, but as a qualification. The F on my transcript, the years of feeling like a disappointment, the sting of being a bad investment, it all suddenly seemed less like an ending and more like a beginning. Her words weren't a criticism of my past. They were an invitation to a future. A future where value wasn't measured by a GPA, but by grit. Where legacy wasn't hung on a wall, but earned in the mud. I have to pause here for a second and just ask you. If you've ever had a trophy, something you were incredibly proud of, that someone you loved just dismissed, I want you to do me a favor. Please hit that like button to support everyone who's ever felt that sting. And in the comments, just type one word, trophy. That's it. So we all know we're not alone. I stood there, staring at that poster, the words, the few, the proud, echoing in my head. My father wanted me to get into Harvard. My mother wanted a return on her investment. But standing there, listening to Gunnery Sergeant Rivera, I realized what I wanted. I wanted to be one of the few. I wanted to find something to be proud of, something that was truly my own. I looked from the recruitment table back in the direction of my dorm room, where the F was still glowing on my laptop screen. One was a symbol of their world. The other was a door out of it. The decision to enlist was the first one I ever made that was entirely my own. It felt like breaking the surface of the water after holding my breath for 20 years. The next step was telling my family. I drove home from college for the weekend, the enlistment papers tucked in my bag like a secret treaty. I chose to tell them at dinner in the same polished mahogany room that served as the stage for all our family dramas. I waited for a lull in the conversation, a rare moment between my mother's discussion of auction items and my brother's talk of stock options. Then, I cleared my throat. "I have something to tell you," I said. "I've enlisted in the Marine Corps. I ship out to Paris Island in 6 weeks." The silence was so sudden and complete it was like a physical blow. My mother's smile froze on her face. Trevor actually stopped swirling his wine. My father slowly, deliberately, set his glass down on the table. The sound seemed to echo in the cavernous room. He stared at me, his face a mask of cold fury. "Let me understand this," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are throwing away a world-class education to become... what? Cannon fodder for the government? That is the choice of people with no other choices, Sophie." Trevor let out a derisive snort. "Trying out for G.I. Jane, are we, sis?" he sneered. "Just try not to embarrass the family with any cheap tattoos." He then raised his glass in a mock toast. "And you'd better watch out, Boot. Mom and Dad are gonna cut off your credit card." They didn't see service. They didn't see honor or courage. They saw another failure, a more public and, to them, a more humiliating one. I had officially traded the potential prestige of a medical degree for the blue-collar grit of the military. In their world, it was the ultimate act of social suicide. I didn't argue. I just sat there, the invisible chains of their expectations finally rusting away. 6 weeks later, I stepped off a bus into the sweltering, unforgiving humidity of Paris Island, South Carolina. It was less a place and more a state of being, a living, breathing furnace designed to melt you down and forge you into something new. The air was thick enough to taste, a cocktail of salt marsh, sweat, and fear. The world shrank to the sound of screaming drill instructors, the burn in my muscles, and the rhythmic thump of boots on pavement. My life in Beverly Hills, with its soft sheets and quiet intellectual cruelty, seemed like a distant dream. Here, the cruelty was loud, constant, and brutally physical. We ran until our lungs felt like they were filled with glass. We crawled through mud that sucked at our boots and caked our skin. We learned to shoot, to fight, to obey without question. There was a moment during the third week on an obstacle course they called the Crucible, when I thought I was broken. It was raining, a cold, miserable downpour. I was trying to haul myself over a high wall, my muscles screaming in protest, my hands raw and slipping on the wet wood. I lost my grip and fell, landing hard in a deep pit of cold, black mud. I lay there for a second, the shock of the cold and the exhaustion overwhelming me. I wanted to quit. I wanted to lie there and let the mud swallow me whole. It would be so much easier. Then, a face appeared over the edge of the pit. It was Gunnery Sergeant Rivera, the woman from the recruitment table. Her eyes were like chips of flint. She wasn't offering a hand. She was offering a challenge. "Get up, Burke," she roared, her voice cutting through the rain. "Your platoon is waiting on the other side of this wall. You're not fighting for some damn diploma here. You're fighting for the person next to you." Something inside me shifted. She was right. For the first time, my struggle wasn't about pleasing my parents or living up to Trevor. It was about the woman shivering to my left and the man gritting his teeth to my right. I found a strength I never knew I had. I clawed my way out of that mud pit, hauled my body over that wall, and kept moving. It was in that pit that the girl from Beverly Hills died, and a Marine was born. 13 weeks later, I stood on the parade deck, ramrod straight in my dress blues. I hadn't just graduated, I'd graduated with the expert rifleman badge, one of the few in my platoon to earn it. A deep, unfamiliar feeling swelled in my chest. It was pride, raw, undiluted, and entirely my own. The ceremony ended, and the deck erupted in a joyous chaos of hugs and happy tears. Families rushed forward, wrapping their new Marines in embraces. I stood at attention, my eyes scanning the crowd near the entrance gates, holding onto a sliver of foolish hope. I searched for my parents' faces, for a sign, a miracle. But there was no one there. They had declined to come, citing a terribly important sociology conference in Aspen that they simply couldn't miss. Later that afternoon, I stood by a payphone and called home. My mother answered, her voice rushed and breezy. "Oh, Sophie, perfect timing," she chirped. "I'm in a crisis. Do you think I should wear the Chanel or the Vera Wang to the gala tonight? The mayor will be there." I stood there, holding the phone, the sounds of celebrating families all around me. "I graduated today, Mom." Yes, that's lovely, dear," she said distractedly. "Happy graduation, sweetie. I have to run." The line went dead. The dial tone that followed was a sound of absolute finality. It hurt more than any physical pain I'd endured over the past 3 months. My first Christmas leave was a lesson in just how far I had drifted from their shore. I walked through the front door in my Service Alpha uniform, the pristine green tunic and brass buttons gleaming. I thought, perhaps, seeing me like this would change something. I was wrong. My mother looked me up and down, a slight frown on her perfectly Botoxed face. "It's very masculine, Sophie," was her only comment. Trevor smirked. "Nice costume. You playing soldier for the holidays?" The final humiliation came on Christmas Eve, just before their annual holiday party. Guests were about to arrive: judges, surgeons, and CEOs. My father approached me as I was checking my reflection in the hall mirror. "Sophie," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion, "go upstairs and change out of that. Put on a dress. I don't want to have to explain your career choices to our guests tonight." He didn't want to explain. He wanted to hide me. My uniform, a symbol of honor and service to the rest of the world, was a source of shame in my own home. That night, as I stood in my room, staring at the uniform I had bled for, I finally understood. This house, with its marble floors and loveless rooms, was not my home. It was just a place I used to live. My family wasn't my family anymore. They were simply the people I was leaving behind. The dial tone from my mother's phone call after graduation echoed in my memory for months. It was a sound of finality, a door clicking shut. But where one door closed, another opened onto the sun-scorched, dust-choked landscape of Kandahar, Afghanistan. Our forward operating base was a world away from Beverly Hills. Here, the air tasted of grit and diesel fumes, and the constant background noise was the whir of helicopter blades, not the tinkle of wine glasses. And it was here, in this place of constant simmering tension, that I finally found my family. They weren't bound to me by blood, but by something stronger, shared risk and unwavering trust. There was our platoon leader, Lieutenant Martinez, a quiet Texan we all called Boss. He rarely smiled, but when he gave you a nod, it felt more valuable than a standing ovation. There was Lance Corporal Ali, a fast-talking Arab American from Dearborn with a grin that could disarm a bomb. We called him Joker because his relentless humor was our primary defense against the crushing weight of this place. And there was Private First Class Lance Peterson, a fresh-faced 19-year-old from a small town in Ohio, whose letters home to his mom were his lifeline. We called him Kid. To them, I wasn't a disappointment, I wasn't an investment, I was Doc Burke. The name was a badge of honor, a title of profound responsibility. They didn't care about my GPA or what college I'd dropped out of. They only cared that when things went wrong, I knew how to put a person back together. They trusted me with their bodies, their fears, and their lives. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The deepest ache of loneliness, however, always hit on Thursdays. Thursday was mail call. It was the moment the war stopped for an hour. A supply truck would roll in, and a sergeant would dump canvas sacks of mail onto a table. The sound of names being called out was met with whoops of joy. Men would tear open packages from home, the smell of fresh-baked cookies from a mom's kitchen briefly overpowering the scent of dust. They'd pass around photos of girlfriends, of new babies they hadn't met yet. My name was never called. The mailbox slot labeled Burke was always empty. To hide the sting, I'd make myself busy, meticulously organizing my medical supplies, pretending I was too focused to notice. One Thursday, after the mail had been distributed and the usual wave of disappointment had washed over me, a shadow fell over my supply kit. It was Lance, the kid. He was holding a half-eaten Hershey's bar, the chocolate melting slightly in the Afghan heat. His mom sent him one in every package. "Hey, Doc," he said, breaking the bar in two. He held out the larger piece to me. "This is from the Burke family. To, Doc Burke." I looked at him, a lump forming in my throat. This 19-year-old kid, thousands of miles from his own home, was showing me more compassion than my own mother had in years. I took the chocolate. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. Another time, it was Ali. He tossed a worn postcard onto my cot. It was a faded picture of the Santa Monica Pier. "Found this at the bazaar," he said with a shrug. "Figured you might be missing the beach." It was a small, simple gesture that meant more than any expensive gift my parents had ever given me. This fragile piece was shattered 2 months into our tour. We were on a routine patrol, a convoy of Humvees kicking up a plume of fine talcum powder dust. I was in the lead vehicle with Martinez. Ali and Lance were in the one behind us. The explosion was a deafening roar that seemed to come from inside my own skull. Our Humvee was violently thrown to the side. I looked back through the thick, acrid smoke. Ali's vehicle was on its side, flames already licking at its undercarriage. The world dissolved into a chaos of noise. The crackle of the fire, the hiss of the radio, and then the distinct, terrifying pop, pop, pop of small arms fire from the surrounding hills. We were in a kill zone. My training took over. My mind went cold and clear. While others were returning fire, my only focus was the overturned Humvee. Ali and Lance were in there. "Doc, stay down!" Martinez yelled, grabbing my arm. I shook him off. "They're still inside, boss." I didn't wait for an answer. I ran. I scrambled out of our vehicle and sprinted across the 20 yards of open, exposed ground, the enemy's bullets kicking up puffs of dust around my feet. The heat from the burning Humvee was intense, a physical wall I had to push through. I could see Ali unconscious, his leg trapped beneath the twisted metal of the dashboard. Lance was dazed but moving, trying to pull him free. I slid through the shattered passenger side window. "Get out, kid!" I yelled over the roar of the flames. "Get to cover! Now!" He scrambled out as I went to work on Ali. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched his leg free. The fire was getting hotter, the smoke thicker. I knew we had seconds before the fuel tank went. I grabbed Ali under his arms and started dragging him, his dead weight a massive anchor. I pulled him out of the wreck and into the dirt just as the Humvee's tires began to explode from the heat. I dragged him behind the meager cover of a large rock, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was bleeding badly from a deep gash in his thigh. I ripped open my medkit, pulled out a tourniquet, and cinched it high and tight, stopping the flow of blood. I stabilized him, kept his airway clear, and talked to him, even though he couldn't hear me, until the medevac chopper finally thundered overhead. Back at the base hours later, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I was sitting on a crate, trying to scrub Ali's blood from under my fingernails when Lieutenant Martinez walked up. He didn't say a word. He just handed me an ice-cold bottle of water. I drank half of it in one go. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "That was brave work, Doc." He paused, looking out at the darkening mountains. "You know, back in the States, people care about your resume. What school you went to, who you know." He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes serious. "Out here, none of that matters. Your resume is zero. Your actions are everything." He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "And today, your actions saved one of our own." He walked away, leaving me there with his words. They settled over me like a warm blanket. It was the purest, most profound form of recognition I had ever received. It was worth more than any Ivy League degree, more than any spot on a wall of legacy. That night, Lieutenant Martinez officially put me in for a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I had a reason to call home with good news. The pride I felt after saving Ali was a clean, sharp feeling, like the cold desert air after a rainstorm. For the first time, I had a piece of good news that felt undeniably real, something that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. Lieutenant Martinez had put me in for the Commendation Medal. It wasn't a degree from Yale, but it was earned with courage, not tuition checks. Holding on to that feeling, I made the mistake of thinking they might finally understand. I found a quiet corner of the communications tent and used the satellite phone to call home. My heart was actually beating faster, a hopeful rhythm against my ribs. My mother picked up on the third ring. "Mom, hi, it's me," I said, the words tumbling out. "I have some really great news. There was an incident on patrol. And everyone's okay, but I was able to help someone, and Lieutenant Martinez has put me in for the Commendation Medal." There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses in the background. "Oh," she finally said, her voice flat and distant. "Well, that's nice for you, Sophie." The words were so dismissive, so utterly devoid of warmth, they felt like a slap. Before I could respond, her tone brightened, suddenly full of life. "Speaking of achievements, did you hear? Your brother just made vice president. The whole family is flying to New York this weekend to celebrate at Perse. It's just wonderful." Another accomplishment for the wall of legacy. And just like that, my life and death achievement was weighed against a corporate title and found wanting. It was less valuable than a celebratory dinner reservation. I felt the familiar coldness seep back into my bones. I mumbled a congratulations and ended the call, the silence in the tent feeling more honest than my mother's voice. A few weeks later, as Christmas approached, a package arrived for me during mail call. It was the first one I'd ever received. For a moment, a foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe they were trying. Maybe the chocolate Lance had given me was a premonition. I tore the box open eagerly, hoping for cookies, a book, anything that felt like home. Inside, there was no taste of home. There was only the bitter taste of rejection. Staring up at me was a glossy, perfectly organized folder. On the front, in bold blue and gold letters, were the words, UCLA School of Nursing. My mother had sent me a pre-filled application package. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on her expensive, cream-colored stationery. It's never too late for a fresh start on a real life, darling. It read, this is a much more respectable path. You could come home, find a nice husband. It wasn't a gift. It was an eviction notice for the life I had chosen, for the person I had become. It was a clear, cold message. You are a mistake that needs to be corrected. I dropped the folder back in the box as if it were on fire. The final severance, the complete and utter disconnect from my reality, came a week later in the form of an email from my father. The subject line was in all caps. Urgent family matter. My blood ran cold. I thought something terrible had happened. I clicked it open, my hands trembling. The message was short. Your grandmother has the flu. Your mother is far too busy with her charity obligations to manage things. You should arrange to take a few weeks of leave to come home and take care of her. I read it once, then twice. Then a third time, the words blurring into an absurd, cruel joke. He was asking me to take a vacation from a war zone, to file a leave request from Kandahar, Afghanistan, to go and look after an elderly woman with a common cold. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of it left me speechless. He didn't just not understand my life, he had no frame of reference for it at all. My service was as trivial to him as a summer job at the mall you could just walk away from. But the true breaking point, the moment the last, thinnest thread connecting me to them finally snapped, came on the night before the most dangerous mission of our tour. Intel had come in about a special forces team pinned down by heavy fire in a remote valley. It was a rescue op with a very high chance of not coming back. The mood on the base was grim, quiet. We were all writing letters home, just in case. I felt a primal need to hear a familiar voice, to get a simple, good luck, or stay safe. I called home one last time. My father answered. I tried to explain the situation without giving away classified details. Dad, I'm going on a difficult mission tomorrow. It's important. I just wanted to call. I could hear the impatience in his sigh. Sophie, I've told you about this need for dramatics. He listened for another moment as I tried to convey the gravity of it. Then he cut me off. His voice was no longer analytical. It was the cold, hard voice of command. Listen to me very carefully, Sophie, he said, each word a chip of ice. Do not try to be something you are not. You are not a hero. You are a Burke. Your job is to keep your head down, do what you are told, and come back. Do not, and I mean this, do not play the hero. Silence. He wasn't telling me to be safe because he loved me. He was ordering me not to die because my death would be an inconvenience. It would be an embarrassing stain on his reputation, a disruption to their perfect, well-ordered world. A dead soldier for a daughter was not a good look in Beverly Hills. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just pressed the button to end the call, cutting him off mid-sentence. I walked out of the tent and into the cold Afghan night. The sky was a vast, dark canvas, punctured by a billion indifferent stars. The air was thin and sharp. I stood there, the dust of the base swirling around my boots, my father's words echoing in my head. Keep your head down. Don't be a hero. It was the cruelest, most selfish order I had ever received. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. The hurt, the sadness, the lifelong ache of seeking their approval. It all burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. He had given me an order, and I was going to disobey it with every fiber of my being. I turned and looked toward the airfield, where the black silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter was being prepped under the floodlights. My team was already gathering. I was going into that valley, and I would not be keeping my head down. My father's order, "Don't be a hero," was still echoing in my mind as I boarded the Black Hawk. It was a ghost in the machine, a cold whisper against the thundering roar of the rotor blades. The faces of my team were grim, illuminated by the dim red light of the cabin. We were flying into hell with a one-way ticket, and every one of us knew it. The flight was tense and blessedly short. We were descending into the valley, the mountains rising around us like jagged teeth when the world exploded. A deafening boom, a violent bone-jarring shudder, and the scream of tortured metal. We'd been hit by an RPG. The world went sideways. I saw the kid's eyes, wide with terror, in the split second before gravity reversed and we were thrown against the ceiling. Then darkness, chaos, and the horrifying sound of the helicopter tearing itself apart as it crashed. I came to in a haze of pain and confusion. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and ozone. The cabin was a mangled wreck of wires and metal. Moans and groans cut through the ringing in my ears. I tried to move, and a searing, white-hot pain shot up my leg. I looked down. A twisted piece of the fuselage, glowing faintly red, was sticking through my calf muscle. My training slammed back into focus. Assess, triage, treat. I was the only corpsman. I was the only one who could. I gritted my teeth, grabbed the hot metal with a piece of torn fabric, and pulled. The pain was blinding. For a second the world went black, but I fought my way back. I was lucid. I was functioning. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled desperation. The wrecked Black Hawk became our field hospital, our tomb. I crawled through the wreckage, my injured leg dragging uselessly behind me, a dead weight of agony. I made a crude bandage for myself, then started on the others. The boss, Lieutenant Martinez, had a compound fracture in his left arm, the bone jutting grotesquely against the skin. Ali had a severe head wound, his face a mask of blood. The worst was Lance, the kid. He had shrapnel wounds in his chest and abdomen and was losing blood fast. Too fast. I used every supply I had. All the morphine went into them, not me. I used my own t-shirt to make a pressure bandage for Lance. I kept talking, a constant stream of reassurances and commands. Stay with me, Joker. Keep your eyes open. Boss, just breathe. We're gonna get out of here. Night fell like a shroud, and with it came the cold. The deep, biting cold of the high desert. We huddled together for warmth amidst the wreckage. And then we heard it. The sporadic crack of rifle fire from the hills above. They knew we were here. They were closing in. When the sun rose on the second day, our situation was critical. The radio was dead. Our water was almost gone. Lance was fading. His breathing was shallow, and his skin had a pale, waxy sheen. He was delirious, muttering for his mother. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes unfocused. "Mom, I'm cold." My own leg was a throbbing universe of pain. But I crawled over to him, ignoring the fire in my nerves. I took his hand. It was clammy and cold. I leaned in close, putting my mouth next to his ear. "It's okay, son," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Mom's right here. You're going to be okay." I became the mother I never had, for a boy who desperately needed his. I looked at Martinez. He knew what I knew. If we stayed here, Lance would die. We all would. "The personal locator beacon," I said, my voice raspy. "It's our only shot. I have to get to higher ground to call in an airstrike on their position." Martinez shook his head, his face grim. "It's suicide, Doc. They've got a sniper up there. Pinned us down all morning." I looked from his desperate face to Lance's pale one. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Saving a life, Sophie. That's a legacy." My father's words followed. "Keep your head down. I made my choice." "There's no other way, boss," I said. I started to crawl. Out from the relative cover of the wreckage, into the open. Every inch was an eternity of agony. My legs screamed with every movement. I dragged myself through the dirt and rocks. My teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. The thought of my family flickered in my mind. Not a loving memory to give me strength, but the cold, hard thought from the night of that final dinner. If I die here, they'll just be annoyed with the paperwork. The thought didn't make me want to quit. It fueled me. It was a bitter, burning rage that pushed me forward. I would not die as an inconvenience. Crack! A bullet zipped past my head, so close I felt the air move. It kicked up a spray of dirt just in front of my face. The sniper had me. I froze, pressing myself flat against the ground, my heart hammering. For a moment, sheer terror paralyzed me. I couldn't move. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The words from Psalm 23 came to me, not as a plea for my own life, but as a prayer for strength. For you are with me. I started moving again, crawling, scrambling, one agonizing inch at a time. The sniper fired again, the bullet ricocheting off a rock near my hand. But I was almost there. A small outcropping of rock, just a little higher than the rest of the terrain. I lunged the last few feet, collapsing behind it. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I pulled the beacon from my vest, flipped the cover, and pressed the button, transmitting our location and the enemy's coordinates. Then, there was nothing to do but wait and pray. Minutes stretched into a lifetime. Then I heard it. A faint, distant rumble that grew into a terrifying roar. I looked up. 2 A-10 warthogs screamed over the valley, their engines a beautiful, terrible sound. They banked hard and the cannons on their noses opened up. The ground shook as a torrent of fire and explosives rained down on the sniper's position on the ridge. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence. The war was over. For now. The rescue chopper arrived an hour later. They found me passed out next to the beacon. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I remember opening my eyes for just a moment. I saw them carrying Lieutenant Martinez on another stretcher. Our eyes met across the chaotic scene. He was pale, in agony, but he looked at me and gave a single, distinct nod. It was a nod of absolute respect, a nod that said more than any medal ever could. In his eyes, I saw my grandfather's legacy. I had saved a life. I had done the one thing my father told me not to do. I had been a hero. Before we continue, I just want to say, if you've ever found strength in a memory, in a prayer, or just in a moment of pure grit when you felt completely alone, please show some love and hit that like button. And in the comments, just type the word strength. Let's fill the comments with it for everyone who's ever had to find their own. I closed my eyes as they lifted me into the helicopter. The last thing I felt before the darkness took me was a sense of release, of a promise fulfilled. The pain in my leg was nothing compared to the weight that had just been lifted from my soul. The nod from Lieutenant Martinez was the last thing I remembered before the world faded to black. When I woke up, the grit and dust of Afghanistan were gone, replaced by the sterile white and antiseptic smell of a hospital. A sign on the wall read, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. The journey from that valley had been a blur of morphine and unconsciousness. Now, there was only the dull, throbbing ache in my leg and a profound, echoing silence. In that silence, the military machine moved with quiet efficiency. Nurses checked my vitals with gentle professionalism. Doctors explained the surgeries I'd undergone to remove shrapnel and repair the muscle. One afternoon, a 2-star general I'd never met before came to my bedside. He pinned a Purple Heart to my hospital gown, his movements crisp and formal. He informed me that my actions had saved my entire team, and that I had been recommended for a higher honor. Everyone in that hospital, the other wounded soldiers in their beds, the doctors, the physical therapists, looked at me with a quiet, profound respect. But the one thing I craved, the one connection to the world I had left behind, remained silent. The satellite phone on my bedside table was a black, lifeless brick. For 3 weeks, it didn't ring. Not once. No calls, no emails, no messages. It was an emptiness so complete, it felt heavier than any wound. My own family didn't know if I was alive or dead. And apparently, they hadn't bothered to find out. My primary physician was an Army major named Davis, a kind man in his 50s with tired eyes and a gentle demeanor. He had a son serving in the infantry. He would often sit by my bed long after his rounds were done, not just to check my charts, but to talk, to listen. One day, seeing the unanswered phone and the look on my face, he put a hand on my shoulder. "Corporal," he said softly, "any father in this world would be proud to have a daughter like you." His words were a balm on a wound I didn't know how to show him. He gave me a gift that day, a worn paperback copy of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. "This helped me through some tough times," he said. "Maybe it'll help you too." On the 22nd day, an email finally arrived. The sender was my mother. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful leap. I clicked it open, bracing myself for, I don't know what. Concern, relief, anger. It was none of those things. The email was a photograph. It showed my family, my mother, my father, and Trevor, standing on a pristine, snow-covered mountain in Aspen, Colorado. They were all smiling, teeth brilliantly white against their tanned faces, decked out in expensive ski gear. Trevor was holding a flute of champagne high in the air in a toast. They looked radiant, perfect, and utterly happy. Below the picture was a single line of text. Sending you some sunshine from Aspen. Trevor just closed his deal with Google. The whole family is celebrating. I stared at the screen, the cheerful image burning into my brain. The pain in my leg was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache that spread through my chest. They weren't just ignoring my reality, they were flaunting theirs. They were celebrating a business deal on a luxurious vacation while I was learning how to walk again in a hospital halfway around the world. They didn't know I'd been hurt. They hadn't even asked. That was the moment the last flicker of hope died. It wasn't a dramatic, fiery death. It was a quiet, cold extinguishment, like a candle finally running out of wax. 2 months later, after multiple surgeries and grueling physical therapy, I was deemed stable enough to be flown back to the States to continue my recovery. I was sent home. Back to the house in Beverly Hills. I walked through the front door on crutches, my leg in a heavy brace. And that brings us back to the dinner, the one where my story began. The filet mignon, the polished silver, the casual cruelty. My mother calling my Purple Heart a piece of cheap jewelry. My brother's mocking laughter, and my father's final clinical judgment. You are this family's greatest disappointment. But this time, hearing those words was different. After everything that had happened, the crash, the firefight, the long silent weeks in the hospital, the picture from Aspen, the words had lost their power to wound me. They no longer felt like a verdict on my worth. They felt like a diagnosis of theirs. I didn't feel the sharp, paralyzing pain of the past. I just felt empty. It was the quiet, calm certainty of an ending. I was looking at 3 strangers with whom I happened to share DNA. They were not my family. They couldn't be. My family was back in Afghanistan, recovering from their own wounds. My family was a doctor in Germany who saw me as a daughter. My family was my grandfather, long gone, whose legacy of compassion I now carried. That night, after my father's pronouncement, I didn't go to my room and cry. I went to my room and packed. I didn't have much. I took a small olive-drab duffel bag and placed inside it only the things that mattered. A faded photograph of my grandfather, smiling in his workshop, the worn paperback of Man's Search for Meaning, and the Purple Heart. I placed it gently on top. That was it. That was the sum of my real inheritance. I didn't write a note. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. There was nothing left to say. To argue would be to imply that their opinion still had weight. It didn't. As I read in Frankl's book, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. The next morning, before the sun had risen, before the first servant had stirred, I made my way down the grand staircase. The crutches were awkward on the marble steps, the soft thump-tap, the only sound in the silent, sleeping house. I reached the massive front door and didn't hesitate. I pulled it open, and the cool, pre-dawn California air washed over my face. It smelled of freedom. I stepped outside onto the manicured stone driveway and pulled the door shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I let it click softly into place. Then, leaning on my crutches, I started down the long driveway, one painful, determined step at a time, and I never once looked back. My silence was my final goodbye. 6 months after I walked out of that house, my life had found a new, quiet rhythm. I was living in a small apartment in San Diego, working at a VA rehabilitation center, helping other veterans navigate the difficult path back to civilian life. The work was meaningful. It was real. I had found a fragile peace. Then, a letter arrived that shattered it. The envelope was thick and bore the official seal of the Department of the Navy. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, the formal language informed me that the review of my actions in Afghanistan was complete. The recommendation for the Commendation Medal had been upgraded. I was to be awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat a Marine can receive, and the ceremony would be held at the White House. My first thought was a jolt of pure, unadulterated pride. My second thought was a knot of dread in my stomach. A formal invitation for my family had been sent to their Beverly Hills address. I knew they would come. Not for me, but for themselves. To decline an invitation from the White House was a social misstep they would never risk. It would be a public admission of a fracture in their perfect family facade, and that was unacceptable. And so, weeks later, I found myself standing in the historic East Room of the White House. The air was thick with the weight of history, the scent of lemon polish and old wood. The room was filled with generals in their decorated uniforms, politicians in dark suits, and the proud, tearful families of the other honorees. And there they were, sitting in the front row, as protocol dictated. The Burke family. My father looked severe and uncomfortable in his Tom Ford suit. My mother wore a Chanel dress, a strained, polite smile plastered on her face as if she were at a tedious but necessary charity luncheon. Trevor sat beside them, looking bored and arrogant, occasionally checking his watch. They looked like porcelain dolls, perfect and out of place in a room full of real human emotion. I stood on the dais with the other recipients, my back ramrod straight in my dress blues. I could feel their eyes on me, but I refused to look at them. My gaze was fixed on a point at the back of the room where Lieutenant Martinez, Ali, and Lance were sitting. They had been flown in for the ceremony. Martinez's arm was still in a sling, Ali had a faint scar on his temple, and Lance, the kid, was pale but smiling from ear to ear. They were my family. They were the reason I was here. A Marine major with a chest full of ribbons stepped up to the podium and began to read my citation. His voice was deep and resonant, filling the grand room. For extraordinary heroism while serving as a corpsman, he began. I watched my family from the corner of my eye. As the major's words painted a picture of the events in that valley, their facades began to crack. Despite sustaining a severe shrapnel wound to her own leg, Corporal Burke immediately began rendering aid to her wounded comrades within the wreckage of a downed helicopter. My mother's polite smile faltered. Her hand, perfectly manicured, fluttered to her throat. With her platoon pinned down by heavy and accurate sniper fire, and with complete disregard for her own safety, Corporal Burke low-crawled across open terrain under direct enemy fire to reach a position from which she could direct close air support. Trevor's smug expression vanished. He sat bolt upright, his mouth slightly agape, as if he were hearing a story about a complete stranger. Her unwavering courage, initiative, and selfless devotion to duty were directly responsible for saving the lives of 5 Marines and preventing the decimation of her platoon. Then I saw it. I saw the look on my father's face. Dr. Edward Burke, the Stanford academic, the man of cold logic and unwavering intellectual confidence, looked utterly and completely shattered. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a horrifying mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. A CNN camera, positioned to capture the reactions of the families, zoomed in on him. His shock, his confusion, his entire world being upended was being broadcast to the nation. He was listening to a story of a daughter he had never known, a hero he had called a disappointment. The President of the United States, a tall man with a kind but serious face, stepped forward and pinned the Navy Cross to my uniform. The medal was heavy, a cross of bronze against the green fabric. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and then turned to the audience. "The citation you just heard," the President said, his voice commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "While accurate, does not tell the full story." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw my father flinch. What the citation doesn't mention, for security reasons until now, is that the Special Forces team Corporal Burke's actions saved were not on a routine mission. They were tracking the leadership of a major terror cell. The President paused, letting his words sink in. The intelligence recovered from that mission, intelligence that was only made possible by Corporal Burke's heroism, directly led to the prevention of 3 separate coordinated bombing attacks planned for Kabul. Hundreds of innocent civilian lives were saved. The room erupted. The applause was a thunderous, deafening roar. It wasn't polite clapping, it was a wave of overwhelming gratitude and respect. I saw general officers on their feet, clapping with tears in their eyes. Furthermore, the president continued, raising his voice over the applause. One of the soldiers saved that day was the younger brother of Senator Thompson, who is with us here today. He gestured to a man in the second row, who was already on his feet, his face etched with emotion. The senator has since been instrumental in passing the Veterans Support Act, a landmark bill that will provide critical funding for mental and physical rehabilitation for our returning heroes. The applause became a physical force, pressing in on me from all sides. Through it all, I looked at my family. They were utterly broken. My mother was openly weeping, but they were not tears of pride. They were tears of shock, of a reality so violently rewritten she couldn't process it. Trevor looked like a ghost, his face drained of all color. And my father, he just sat there, staring into space, the camera still fixed on his face. The wall of legacy he had so carefully constructed, the degrees, the corporate titles, the magazine covers, had just been obliterated. It had been rendered meaningless, turned to dust by the one thing he had never valued, never understood: the legacy of his greatest disappointment. After the ceremony, the applause faded and the crowd began to disperse. A Secret Service agent escorted me and my platoon mates to a quiet, private waiting room. The feeling in the air wasn't triumphant. It was heavy, exhausted. I felt a hollow sort of satisfaction, like finishing a race only to realize the finish line was just the start of a longer, more complicated journey. A few minutes later, the door opened. My family walked in. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of the power and prestige of their usual surroundings. They hovered awkwardly near the door, a tableau of stunned silence. Lieutenant Martinez, who had insisted on staying by my side, stood quietly, a solid, reassuring presence. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling, her usual social grace completely gone. "Sophie," she began, twisting the strap of her expensive handbag. We had no idea. We just didn't know." Her voice trailed off, her eyes pleading for some kind of absolution. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without the filter of a daughter's longing. There was no anger left in me, just a vast, quiet clarity. "It's not that you didn't know, Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It's that you never asked." The simple truth of it hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. It dismantled every possible excuse, every potential defense. Beside me, I saw Lieutenant Martinez give a slow, almost imperceptible nod. My mother flinched as if I'd struck her, a hand flying to her mouth. She had nothing else to say. The weeks that followed were a deluge. My phone, which had been silent for years, now buzzed incessantly. It was a storm of late-arriving apologies. Trevor was the first to call. The smug, arrogant tone I'd known my whole life was gone, replaced by a hesitant, unfamiliar humility. "Soph, I've been an arrogant ass," he stammered. "A complete bastard. I saw Dad's face on CNN. I saw yours. I'm sorry. I'm just really sorry." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. My mother called constantly, often in tears. Her apologies were a tangled mess of regret and social anxiety. "All my friends from the club are calling," she'd weep into the phone. "They're asking why I never mentioned any of this. The way they look at me now, Sophie, I'm so ashamed. I regret it all. I truly do." I listened to them, to all their desperate, clumsy attempts to bridge the canyon that now lay between us. But their apologies all seemed to orbit around a central theme: their own shame, their own discomfort. Their regret was born from the harsh light of public exposure, not from a true, empathetic understanding of the darkness they had left me in for all those years. They were sorry for how my story made them look. My father did not call. Instead, he sent a long, meticulously composed email. I read it in my small San Diego apartment, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. It wasn't an apology. It was an academic thesis on his own miscalculations. Sophie, it began, the events of the past few weeks have compelled me to reevaluate my metrics for success. My framework was, I can now admit, too narrow. It failed to account for variables such as physical courage and altruistic sacrifice. He went on like that for 3 paragraphs, analyzing his own flawed worldview as if it were a failed scientific hypothesis. He never once said the words, I'm sorry, or I hurt you. He concluded with a sentence that I knew, for him, was the ultimate concession, the most profound admission of defeat he was capable of. Your legacy, he wrote, in a manner I did not anticipate, has eclipsed my own. I closed the email. He still didn't see a daughter. He saw a competing legacy, a data point that had defied his predictions. The emotional distance was as vast and cold as the space between galaxies. I knew I needed help processing it all. I started attending a group therapy session at the VA hospital for veterans with PTSD. I sat in a circle with men and women who had seen things I could only imagine, who carried scars both visible and invisible. There, I learned a crucial lesson. I learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving the other person. It's about freeing yourself. And I learned that establishing boundaries, even with family, isn't an act of selfishness. It's an act of self-preservation. I took their calls. I read their emails. I didn't yell or recriminate. I listened. And when I had heard enough, I sent a single, simple text message to a group chat with my mother, father, and brother. I appreciate you reaching out, I wrote. I need some time. It was the most powerful I had ever felt. I wasn't running away. I was taking control. My healing was not going to be dependent on their remorse. My peace was not their property to give or take away. It was mine to build. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my couch reading when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up. The caller ID was a single word. Father. 9 years ago, that call would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. 1 year ago, it would have been a surge of anger. 6 months ago, it would have been a wave of hurt. But now, I just looked at it. I watched the screen glow, the name pulsing silently in the quiet of my apartment. There was no anger, no pain, no turmoil. There was just a quiet, calm stillness inside me. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and I had come out the other side. His voice and the world it represented held no more power over me. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out. I didn't decline the call. I simply picked up the phone, turned it over, and placed it face down on the table. Then I silenced the ringer. I had chosen peace. A year after the ceremony at the White House, my life looks nothing like I ever imagined. I'm still a Marine, but my battlefield has changed. I'm now an instructor at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. My apartment overlooks the quiet, historic streets of the city, a world away from the dust of Kandahar and the sterile emptiness of Beverly Hills. Today, I stand in front of a classroom of young, nervous faces. They are the new generation of Navy corpsmen and Army medics, kids barely out of their teens, about to be sent to places I know all too well. They are looking at me, a corporal with a Navy cross on her chest, expecting me to teach them how to save lives from a textbook. I don't start with a textbook. I start with the truth. I unbutton the jacket of my service uniform. I shrug it off and lay it carefully over the back of a chair. Then I turn to face them, wearing just my khaki shirt. The jagged, puckered scar on my shoulder, where the first piece of shrapnel hit, is clearly visible. So is the long, angry line that runs down my calf, a permanent reminder of the helicopter crash. This is your first lesson, I say, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. Your scars are not your weakness. They are not something to be hidden. They are proof that you were stronger than whatever tried to break you. They are your credentials. They prove you have earned the right to heal others. I see a change in their eyes. The nervousness is replaced by a dawning understanding. I don't just teach them how to apply a tourniquet or insert a chest tube. I teach them how to listen to the silence between a soldier's words, how to recognize the wounds you can't see. The deepest wounds you'll have to treat, I tell them, are the ones that never bleed. Learn to listen for them. My old family, the Burkes, have been changing too. In their own quiet, clumsy ways. The lines of communication are open now, but they are careful, respectful. The frantic, desperate apologies have stopped, replaced by something quieter, something that feels more real. Trevor, in a move that shocked me, stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company. He started a nonprofit foundation that teaches coding and software development to wounded veterans, giving them new skills for a new life. My mother, in an even more surprising turn, volunteers twice a week at the local VA hospital, reading to blind veterans and helping to organize events. They aren't doing it to win me back. I know that now. They are doing it because the reflection they saw of themselves on national television horrified them. Their world was cracked open that day, and they are trying, in their own way, to put it back together differently. Every few weeks, a small package will arrive from my mother. It's never an application form. Last month, it was a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver. The month before, a special blend of herbal tea she thought might help me sleep. They are small gestures, tentative bridges built across a vast canyon. I'm not ready to cross them yet. Maybe I never will be, but I appreciate the effort. During a rare video call with Trevor a few weeks ago, he seemed hesitant. "Hey, Soph, can I show you something?" he asked. I nodded. He turned his phone's camera around. He was in the living room of the Beverly Hills house. He panned over to the fireplace, to the wall of legacy. It was different. The Stanford PhD and the Yale law degree had been moved to the side. The Forbes magazine cover was gone. In the very center, in the place of highest honor, was my Navy Cross. It was professionally mounted in a beautiful shadow box, with a small discreet light illuminating it from above. "It belongs there, Soph," Trevor said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. I looked at the image on my screen. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, of vindication. But I didn't. All I felt was a quiet, bittersweet sadness for the 14-year-old girl whose golden trophy had been used as a doorstop, for all the lost years. "Thank you, Trevor," I said softly, and I meant it. Later that evening, I sat on my small balcony, looking out at the Washington, D.C. skyline, the monuments glowing softly in the twilight. It occurred to me then that my long, painful journey was never really about seeking their acceptance. It was always about finding my own. My vindication didn't happen in the East Room of the White House. It happened years before. It happened the moment I clawed my way out of that mud pit on Paris Island. It happened when I chose to run towards a burning Humvee, not away from it. The ceremony was just a public confirmation of a truth I had already forged for myself in fire and blood. My grandfather once told me about a legacy that no wall was big enough to hang. I finally understood what he meant. My legacy isn't that bronze cross in a shadow box in Beverly Hills. It's alive. It's breathing in the 5 Marines who went home to their families because of what happened in that valley. It's in the quiet confidence I see growing in the young medics in my classroom. My legacy is the healing I can now offer to others because of the wounds I carry myself. The future is no longer a path that was paved for me. It's an open road. And for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the map. And so, that's my story. Thank you for walking this road with me. My journey was about finding my own map and defining my own legacy, not by what was hung on a wall, but by what I could give back. I truly believe that every one of us has a legacy to write and a map to draw, often with the very pieces that life has broken. That's what this channel is all about, sharing the stories of those who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. If my story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to become part of our community. For one last time, in the comments below, I'd love to know, what is one thing you are putting on your own map for the future? Let's continue to navigate them together.